Today we are joined by Daniel Raven-Ellison, a guerrilla geographer, explorer, and campaigner. Dan has worked on inspiring projects that connect people with places, from leading the campaign to make London the world's first national park city to founding Slowways, an initiative to create a network of walking routes that connect the UK's towns, cities, and national parks. A few years ago, Dan even walked over 1,600 kilometres across the UK, national parks and cities, documenting how his emotions changed throughout the journey by wearing a headset that tracked his emotional responses. His work challenges us to see geography not just as a subject in the classroom, but as something we live and experience every day. So welcome, Dan, to The Curious Geographer.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
Right, let's dive straight in. So you describe yourself as a guerrilla geographer. What exactly is a guerrilla geographer? What do you mean by this?
Guerrilla geography is radical, alternative, surprising, delightful geographies that challenge us to think differently about the world. So there's lots of people who will be aware of Banksy. Banksy may not think of himself as a guerrilla geographer, but I think he is, because he will take artwork and put it into surprising places to challenge us to think about global events or what's happening in the world. And even in the artwork itself, he'll often take something out of someone's hand and replace it with something else, taking things out of place, a geographic idea, again, to challenge us to think differently. Or another tool, I guess, within the guerrilla geographer's sort of Swiss Army knife of devices would be thinking about guerrilla gardening, which is where people often find dead spaces that are neglected, that are making people feel sad, and people plant them up with beautiful flowers, increase biodiversity, make the area more delightful for people, and spread joy in the process. These are all about changing places. Geography is all about places, to make places better and make our lives better in one way or another.
I love that. That's so interesting. And about the whole kind of like dynamic nature of it as well. And about kind of disrupting and change. That's a really nice way to put it, and kind of see it in different scales. Students can be guerrilla geographers by how they kind of view the world.
Without doubt. So I think we're all actually explorers. I think we're all geographers because we're all interested in places, whether it's our homes or where we like to travel or places we like to explore. And guerrilla geography is about just saying, well, what if we just did things a bit differently to see things differently or explore things differently? And the relativism in that is that sometimes just even climbing a tree might seem really radical to some people, but to others might be perfectly normal. So the idea of guerrilla geography also flexes depending on who you are and where you are in the world as well.
Brilliant. And linking to climbing trees, London as a national park. So you led the campaign to make London the world's first national park city. And London is really green, and we actually learn about that in GCSE geography as well, with all of our green spaces. But what does it mean? Because London is technically an urban space, it is a city. What does it mean that it's a national park, and how does it change the way people experience urban landscapes?
I think national parks are simply one of humanity's very best ideas, and they are incredible geographic concepts, right? So what we're saying is, by giving a place a boundary and a name, we give it an identity, and we can create culture in that space, we can share ideas in that space, and we can change what that place looks like as a result as well. And with a national park, fundamentally, we know these are places where we come together to have a better relationship with nature. We can go to enjoy ourselves, to be more well. And to be honest, where we are right now with the climate and ecological crisis, if we didn't have a family of thousands of protected areas around the world, we would be in a far worse situation than where we are right now. But that urban area you just described is just like a classification for a type of land. And yes, London is an urban area, but London is an urban area that also contains about 15,000 species of wildlife. There are as many trees as people. There's something like 300 languages spoken. And each one of us as Homo sapiens, our DNA is actually predominantly non-Homo sapien DNA as well. So even ourselves as habitats within this urban habitat are habitats ourselves as well. And so I just got thinking about that and got thinking, if there are national parks around the world that are deserts, right, and that are glaciers, what's wrong with where we live, like urban environments? Aren't the red foxes and the peregrine falcons and the people just as important, just as beautiful, just as fast as those that live in those other places? Only there's a far greater abundance and diversity of life in cities, precisely because, in London's case, of what people have done for actually a couple thousand years within the city to make the city greener, healthier, wilder. So I just thought, myself and got asking people, well, what if we made London a national park city too? What if we applied those principles of large scale, long term, holistic, systems based thinking where we can create identity and story and shared experience amongst Londoners? What would that mean for the city? And at a time, I think, when there's a lot of um, challenges in society around the world, having a really hopeful story and vision that we can all be part of by just doing simple things, I think is actually extremely powerful. So it started off with just asking the question, what if, why not? And then lots of people started asking that question. And in 2019, London became the world's first national park city. And then Adelaide followed, then Chattanooga in Tennessee earlier this year, and then most recently Breda in the Netherlands.
Oh, wow. So there's actually quite a few places now, which is quite exciting.
Yeah, it's really exciting. And what I find really fascinating, there was a colleague in Tokyo who was thinking about this concept in Japan, and they were just making this observation that around the world we share very many of the same anxieties in our cities, around climate change or disease around COVID or Ebola. We have concerns around AI or employment. These are common amongst humans around the world, but actually our solutions for how we tackle them are incredibly diverse, depending on where we are in the world and the cultures and our view upon how we find these solutions. So actually having a family of national park cities around the world where people have the same interests and needs and yet have diverse solutions creates an incredible opportunity for sharing those solutions between us. And that's one of the things I find most exciting actually about this idea of having a family of national park cities.
And you can actually, I went to a museum in London over the summer holidays, and you can buy the national park city maps, which is quite cool. That actually, I think what you were kind of talking about with the guerrilla geography, getting you to disrupt your thinking and thinking about new places. And it just really highlights all the green spaces as well and how people can use them. And yeah, it's kind of interesting in terms of how you describe everybody as explorers and geographers, how that is almost like demonstrated through creating national parks.
Yeah, but it's a massive act of guerrilla geography. I mean, to be honest, when John Muir and some of the founding actors of the national park movement created the first national parks, they were activists who persuaded government to work with them to protect these large landscapes from destruction of wildlife due to loads of farming or too much hunting, different activities around like new settlements being created, and they created Yellowstone and these other great national parks. So actually with the national park city, it's a very similar thing. We're citizens, we're just people who are actually also trying to persuade government to help us do better things to protect nature. And having a map of London, not only allows us to create those boundaries and that vision and imagine London as this national park city, but you can start seeing the places you might be able to reconnect and connect up in terms of having better green corridors for people and wildlife, or places you might want to explore that you hadn't been to before. And I think it's an invitation, that map, as is the national park city, to say, well, what if we did things differently? What if the River Thames was clean enough to swim in? What if we had more beavers and otters on the tributaries of the Thames? What if we had 1,000 more rope swings through the city? What if there was more outdoor learning in schools? What if, and begin to ask these questions, because if we live in a national park city, then surely all these things should be happening that make the city greener, healthier, wilder, and it creates that political tension and creativity around the delivery of those things.
Brilliant. And within that, and before you were talking about obviously how interacting with green spaces and nature, how that is really important for our mental health and well-being, and particularly as you mentioned, when we have climate change and all these things that can kind of just really add to a lot of anxiety, particularly for young people as well. And green spaces and connecting with nature can be really important, which kind of links us on to you investigating your emotions in different environments. And it's what we mentioned at the beginning, was that you walked 1,600 kilometers across the UK to kind of discover emotionally how geography kind of impacted your emotions, and you explored kind of many different places and locations. So what inspired you to do this, and what did you discover from your journey?
The inspiration was that I was on the campaign trail alongside many others around making London a national park city, and there are many different voices saying, well, how can a city be a national park? What are you talking about? That doesn't make any sense. Who are you anyway to be saying these kinds of things? And so I managed to team up with National Geographic and Cisco, which is a tech company, who are interested in trying to tell a story around how you can use sensors to sense what's happening in the environment, to tackle different social and environmental challenges. And so I had this idea of, well, if I walked across all the national parks and all the cities in the country, that would create a story using my body as a vessel traveling through these landscapes, which would help move forward with authority this idea of London as a national park city. And it would give me that additional power and energy by going on the journey to do that. And at the same time, I could research how my brain would react to different types of land cover, different types of land as I went through the environment. So I had this headset on my head with these wet sensors, which weren't very good in the wintertime, actually, a bit uncomfortable. And dogs would bark at me for some reason because, they're obviously a bit freaked out by the fact that I've got this weird thing on my head, like an episode of Black Mirror or something. And I'd go on these journeys across the national parks or cities, and literally every second it would be recording my levels of excitement, relaxation, focus, stress as I was going through the environment. And I was able to map what was going on. It's slightly pseudoscientific because the sensors were sometimes a bit awry because I'm moving around, and it's just a sample of one. But what I did find was that my brain particularly was most relaxed and most excited when I was in deciduous woodland, so woodland where the leaves fall off the trees in the wintertime, deciduous woodland in urban areas. So if I was walking through a national park and I came across some deciduous woodland, my uplift in relaxation and excitement was less than if I went into a smaller area inside a city. And what that kind of tells us is how important maybe, well, there's lots of evidence actually for this, but my evidence, that how important it can be to have green spaces inside towns and cities. And actually there's swathes of evidence now to show that being connected to nature and having time outdoors and being in green and blue spaces improves our mental health, our physical health, can help it make us more well, more quickly. It can increase our productivity, our creativity, all these kinds of things. But anyway, so that story that really helped me to energize the London National Park City campaign, but also I think, helps to sort of really communicate this idea that we need to make cities greener and more equitable for the people living inside them.
That's so interesting. And that's a really interesting finding about it happening in cities is where you're kind of where you felt most relaxed. And I think that's the thing where geography is really just about like the real world as well. Like it is about our connection to place, our everyday interactions. It's why people do feel so much better if you go for a walk in the park or if you go for a run as well. We learn about place a lot in A-level geography, but it really does link to students' day-to-day experiences.
And I think within that as well, like this concept of scale that we like using a lot in geography, I find that really important to me in terms of this conversation and thinking about, for example, notions of rewilding. So when people talk about rewilding and ecological restoration, I think ecologists are often thinking at a landscape scale, like the size of London or the size of Britain, which is understandable. But actually, a single oak tree might have 500 species living on it, and to a small child, touching the complexity of the oak tree and seeing the dappled light and enjoying that tree may be as valuable as a much wider landscape they can't see. So from a human perspective, even a small green space can be really powerful. But then flipping that the other way around as well, many ecologists wouldn't agree with me on this, but I think that when I leave, actually there's a wasp nest at the moment in the eaves of my house, and I'm waiting for it to die back naturally with winter, cohabiting with a few hundred wasps, because I don't want to go up there and like kill these insects during the middle of an ecological crisis. So we've got spiders in the house as well. Now, they're not working at a landscape scale, that ecological gift I'm giving them of not killing them in my house. But nonetheless, I am rewilding or allowing wildness to exist in corners of my house. And I think that we need to understand far more that from the perspective of individual animals, that sometimes enabling nature might be about that individual spider or that individual wasp, and not always thinking about these very large scales. And I think that's a very powerful idea for those of us who live in cities, because we may not have a lot of space to, bring back whole beaver, colonies or something, or bring back lynxes, but we can do things to help insects and birds like where we live.
Brilliant. And that really links to how students or how young people also can make a difference, as you mentioned, on that small scale. You don't need to change a massive space. Like in our everyday actions, these little things can make a big difference.
Make a big difference, especially to them, right? To other sentient beings that share this planet with us. We make a big difference to them as well as to ourselves.
And our final question kind of links to this, but what advice would you give young or curious geographers who want to explore and connect more deeply with the world around them, both near and far?
It's a really good question. I think the first thing is to acknowledge, I think that we are all explorers, right? So exploration is about asking questions and it's about searching for answers and ideally enjoying ourselves along the way, maybe discovering things that you haven't discovered before, other people haven't discovered before. And you can do that accidentally by just sort of going through life and not thinking about it too much, and you just happen upon things. Or you can do it with intentionality as well. And there are just fun things you can do to take yourself out for adventures that maybe people haven't thought about so much before. So, for example, you might want to just draw a line on a map and go to the limits of where you're allowed to go to. And see what you can find along the way, or do a spiral walk going down every single alley and every single road to get to know a place really intimately. You might want to get some dice and roll them and let them choose where you're going to go at the end of each path or each street. You might want to do that while intentionally wearing something else to see how people react to you while you're wearing that thing. There's just lots of different provocative, playful ways in which we can use things to navigate the world differently. I really love the fact that so many of us have cameras as well to go on a journey, but to photograph something along the way. And it might be that it's something like obvious, like birds, but it might also be something like injustice or disgust or surprise, and just photograph and see what you notice in the landscape that you hadn't otherwise seen. And it might be things in the built landscape, it might be something in people, it might be something in wildlife, but just take notice of those things. I think the more we do that and practice that, the more powerful we are as explorers and geographers. But what I'd say in terms of the guerrilla geography bit is I think when we spot things where there's an injustice or something's unfair, thinking about ways in which we can highlight that or do something about that to rectify that injustice is where I think geography is really powerful. You know, it's not about being passive. Actually, we do want to make places or the world or our lives or others' lives better in one way or another. That's why I'm in geography.
Brilliant. That's so good. And I think that the advice really links to kind of students of all ages. I remember actually when I was at university, we had a nice trip to Barcelona, but one of the instructions was literally explore the place by following the color red or following a sign. And we were kind of university students. So it really can be kind of all geographers of all ages, older people as well, just looking to understand. I think it's great if you go on holiday as well, if you go somewhere new, actually how you can discover different things by not going along the tourist route, or how you can actually rediscover your own place where you live, where roads you might not have been down before.
This is the thing, the quirk of history about geography in part, weirdly, is that when you go to a science museum or you do an experiment, you know you're doing science, and clearly there's science in geography as well. And if maybe you go to a castle, people think, oh, I'm doing history because I'm going to a castle. Geography is everything from what's going on the palm of your hand to where your cat likes to go, to where you want to go on holiday, like where you choose, where's the best place to go, what you're going to choose to do when you get there. Geography is full of rich delight. And I hope that everyone watching this can really lean into that as their careers go forward in geography.
Brilliant. That's such a nice way to have to kind of get students inspired to have you as a guest for our first interview. It's the first interview I've done in a while, and really kind of set off the new term for everybody, the new school year, kind of really rethinking about what that purpose of geography is and how people connect with places. So thank you so much for being a guest. And there are a few things that if students are kind of interested in what you're doing, and teachers as well.
You can just search Dan Raven-Ellison, check out London National Park City, check out Slowways. But I've also got a really cool film called UK in 100 Seconds that shows how we're using land across the UK in 100 seconds. So just search any of that stuff.
Brilliant. And then if you're a teacher, I know the wonderful Kate Stockings has also been involved in making some amazing teacher resources, which link to London as a national park city as well. So that's a good thing to check out to use in your classes. Brilliant. Thanks so much. And yeah, thanks everybody.